Let's bow our heads for prayer. Gracious Lord, you are such a great and loving God, and you know what we need, and you have provided much of that today. We're thankful for what you have done for us. We're thankful that Barbara has been here. We pray that you will bless her now as she puts the crowning touch on her lectures. These things we pray in Christ's precious name. Amen.
This afternoon I'm going to talk about diabetes. Diabetes is a lifestyle condition, and some say, but isn't there a difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Well, we've had people conquer type 1 diabetes, and most people are told that you can't conquer it. So I'm going to begin with a story, and I'm going to begin with a story of a man named Bobby who came to our retreat in Alabama, or maybe it's about 8 years ago now. And he came in a wheelchair. He was 62. And he said, I've got diabetes, I've got high blood pressure, I'm on a lot of medication. He said, I went to the doctor recently and he said, there's no more that they can do for me. He said, I've spent $1 million on my health in the last 10 years. He said, they recently took my lymph nodes out of my groin in an attempt to find out why I had diabetes. So on the plane trip, his legs swelled up. That's why he was in a wheelchair. He said, do you think you can help me? And I said, I do. He told me that he'd met a woman in Florida at a swimming pool who'd heard his story and said, I think I know a lady that can help you. So what I did was I got him to get on the rebounder every hour for 1 minute and just do this. That's all. Because what the rebounder does, it stimulates the lymphatic system. And that fluid is lymphatic fluid because his lymph nodes in his groin are gone. So you've got to help the body move that lymphatic fluid. And that's all he did. That's called the health bounce. Now anyone can do that, can't they? And I also got him to walk barefoot on the grass. But it was soft, very nice grass. First 2 days he was on juices, and then when we started eating, I will go through what he ate. It was actually very similar to what everyone else ate. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. After 2 weeks he was on 10 units of insulin. He was off his blood thinning medication and he was taking cayenne pepper. He was off his cholesterol lowering medication, no need to take that. He'd reduced his blood pressure medication. He was taking the hawthorn berry to help with that. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I'm off all my medication. He said, I have lost 45 pounds in weight. I said, tell me what you're doing, because you can't get those results unless you're doing something. He said, I'm just doing what you told me. He said, I'm swimming 30 laps of the pool a day. He said, I'm rebounding 3 minutes 3 times a day. And he said, and I'm cycling 6 miles a day. You see, he had to rebound or cycle or swim. That's the only exercise he could do because his lymph nodes in his groin had gone, so he couldn't do too much exercise that put weight on his legs. He said, my doctors are astonished. Can you remember what the doctors did? They said, we can do no more for you. Now, when he went home, his wife, who's 42, he's 62, he's a very wealthy man, she said, this is your baby, I'm not interested, I like my croissants and my champagne. But after 3 months, she's looking at her husband. She got a new husband. And you know what? He doesn't get grumpy anymore. His nature's better. Can you see how the 8 laws of health even affect our mood? She said, he said to me, she's on the diet now. She's already lost, I think she'd lost 15 pounds and she's happy. She's got new outfits. And all her girlfriends are saying to her, what happened to you? Can you see how this message can spread? Can you see the most powerful way that it can spread? Not by anything you say, but what you do. That's why God said, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in his sight. So I want to show you what we did with Bobby. And it might surprise you, some of the things we're going to look at. Definitely, there's been no diabetes on the planet until sugar was refined. That's absolutely true. There's no mention of it in Hippocrates' writings because sugar was not refined, absolutely. But something else has come into the equation. And I'll give you the story of it. And before I give you the story of it, I want to tell you about a story that was told in the book Temperance, 2nd chapter. Satan and his angels were having a conference about how they could do the most harm to humanity. And Satan himself came up with a plan. They would change certain foods, the fruit of the vine and wheat, into poisonous substances. Now, when was this written? 1850s? And you have a look in Revelation chapter 18 at the devil's market. There's one grain mentioned in the devil's market, and you know what it is? Wheat. Wheat. So what happened to the wheat? Well, it was in the 1950s they wanted to produce a plant with a high yield of grain to save the starvation crisis. Now, wheat used to grow that big. Have you noticed today it only grows that big? Because when they hybridized it to grow that big, before the harvest, the stalk would break because it was so heavy with grain. So now they went back to the drawing board. Now we have a plant that grows that high. It's got a thick stem. Heavy yield of grain. Sometimes 8 to 10 times more grain per plant. In fact, Dr. Norman Boulard got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat in 1976. So in the 70s, this wheat's growing worldwide. So by the 1990s, every pasta, every bread, every cereal, every article in the cake shop, it's all made out of the hybridized wheat. Now I want you to notice that. Did you notice that we did not hear of gluten intolerance until probably early 2000? So gluten intolerance was not around before the hybridization of the wheat. A man said to me, Barbara, you're wrong on the wheat. Jesus is the bread of life. I said, he is the bread of life. But this is a different bread today. And isn't it interesting, in the book Temperance, Ellen White shows that it was predicted that the wheat would be changed. We know the damage that's been done by the fruit of the vine, the alcohol, but comma and wheat, certain foods would be changed. So what happened to the wheat? Well, in the hybridization of the wheat, they rushed it through without any safety studies. That sounds like the COVID vaccine, doesn't it? Have you ever asked for the safety studies on the vaccine? If you're given anything, it will be blank pages. I'm not interested in being experimented on. So it was rushed through with no safety studies, but only now are they starting to see where the problems have arisen. 2 things were changed. One was the gluten or the protein structure, and this gluten or protein structure is incredibly complex. It's almost only the cast iron gut can break that down, and as you saw this by our last lecture, there's not many cast iron guts around anymore. And so there's your gluten intolerance, there's your celiac. It's from this hybridized wheat. But it's also happening because many people are just overdoing this wheat. Cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, biscuits, cakes, donuts, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. It's just a total overload of one grain. And it just so happens to be the grain that the great deceiver was behind the changing of it. But what's particularly pertinent to diabetes is what the hybridization process did to the starch structure. So I'm going to draw this up on the board to show you what happened. So the hybridization of the wheat created a starch structure called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, so then you've got this corresponding drop. In fact, apparently even higher than refined sugar. And how many foods, what are your donuts and your biscuits and your cakes? They're a combination of, and a lot of cereals, those two. So let me give you something to compare it to. We've got amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes. And if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, which is how quickly the glucose is released in that food, bananas and potatoes are quite high. So where's bananas and potatoes? They're not as high, and they don't go up as fast, and they don't come as low. That's your amylopectin B. Amylopectin C is found in legumes. There's your beans, there's your legumes, chickpeas, lima beans, I think you call them garbanzos, lentils. So let's have a look at amylopectin C. Amylopectin C gives a lovely steady rise, maintenance, and a nice steady drop. That's what every cell in the body wants. Steady, sure, consistent delivery of fuel. That's what our body wants. That's what our brain wants. So let's have a look at the glycemic index of foods. Glycemic index of foods is how quickly the glucose is released in that food. Now, the baseline is 55, so let's go down. So these are the good ones because they give a nice slow release. So cherries, in fact, all your berries, they sit at about 26. And grapefruit. I think everyone's familiar that grapefruit's not a real sweetie. It sits at about 25. So you see, they're good fruits for the diabetic because they don't get the blood sugar level up high and fast. Where does sugar sit? Sugar sits at about 51. Where does white? We'll do white wheat. White wheat sits at about 61. So your refined wheat gets the blood sugar level up higher than sugar. Now the next piece of information I'm giving you is shocking. Whole wheat, what about whole wheat? That's the white, this is the whole. What about whole wheat? Whole wheat sits at 72. How could that be? But isn't whole wheat better than white? In some respects it is, because it's got fibre and it's got more B vitamins, absolutely. But regarding the amylopectin A, because the whole meal is not refined, it has got more amylopectin A in it than the white. Michael said to me, my husband, he said, Barbara, what's going on? He said, I've got this lady ringing up and she says, Barbara says white bread's better than brown bread. What's she talking about? And I said, in relationship to the amylopectin A. But you can still get a wheat today that has not been hybridized. So it doesn't have this problem. It's just the hybridized wheat. That's spelt. You familiar with spelt? And also Emmer, E-M-M-E-R. They're wild hybrids of the original. Enkenhorn. Enkenhorn is the original wheat. So you can get some of the original wheats. I had a lady attend our program and I explained that and she began to cry. I said, why are you crying? She said, I'm a diabetic. She said, I'm 65. I was diagnosed 2 years ago. I do everything they tell me. I have wholemeal bread. I have wholemeal pasta. I have wholemeal cereal. And she said, and every 6 months, I'm put on more insulin. She said, and I'm doing what they tell me. She said, the lady up the road, she has donuts and pizzas. And she said, I don't do that. She said, I'm crying because I have been so frustrated that I'm doing what they tell me and yet I'm getting worse. She said, I'm crying because you've just solved the problem. Now, if you want to explore this in more detail, and as medical missionaries I think it's important, there's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. Very interesting book. He gives a whole story of what they've done to the wheat. And isn't that even more interesting to us as Seventh-day Adventists to know that Ellen White predicted that the wheat would be changed? Do I eat wheat? Yeah, but not much. Not much. If I was a diabetic, I wouldn't touch it. If I had a health problem, I wouldn't touch it. And this is why the wheat's particularly bad for people with gastro problems, is because of the irritating way that gluten is not broken down properly. And so the refined sugar, absolutely, and the wheat. But have a look at what many people have for breakfast cereal. A lot of it's made on wheat, Weet-Bix. But if people like Weet-Bix, I've got some good news. You can get gluten-free Weet-Bix. It's made out of sorghum. I know in Australia they only ever grew sorghum for cows. Then they discovered it's a grain that has no gluten. So now you can actually buy sorghum flour and you can buy gluten-free Weet-Bix. Myself, I'm not too interested in that as a breakfast. But how many have it? Have a cereal and then have milk and then sugar on top. And those three things are precursors to actually creating diabetes. We know the sugar and we know the wheat. Well, what about the dairy? Well, in the gastrointestinal tract, if the dairy or the milk is not broken down, then molecules get into the blood and antibodies are made for those molecules. But those molecules are very, very similar to the beta cells in the pancreas. So what happens is the antibodies that are created to wipe out the breakdown that wasn't properly breakdown from the milk, they turn around and start attacking the beta cells in the pancreas. And if you want to explore that a little bit more, Campbell in his book China Study, he explores that a little bit more. So the breakfast of the nation, the cereal and the milk and the sugar, precursing for diabetes. I don't know about in the US, but in Australia, 500 are being diagnosed every day. So since the wheat was hybridised, we've just got an explosion. You want to talk about true pandemics? Isn't diabetes a true pandemic? Absolutely. But I'd like to show you too another aspect. So people today are eating high carbohydrate diets. And I don't think anyone ever chose to eat this way. I think it's just something that evolved because we're such a fast society. I have ladies come to the retreat and they say, Barbara, you don't understand, I don't cook. So my response to that is, do you eat? Well, you don't have to cook today because there's fast food shops everywhere, isn't there? But what are they doing to us? They're actually killing us. So I want to do an assessment of carbohydrate. So most Australian and possibly American homes, in fact, no matter where I go, cereal is taken for breakfast and bread. And then for many people, mid-morning, they like to stop for cakes, biscuits, etc., etc. So I'm going to say cakes, etc. Another fast food that's very popular is pizza. And another fast food in many homes, and of course restaurants, we've got faster pasta. I don't know if you have faster pasta at home, whole shops just having pasta. Pasta's a very popular one. I'm a fifth generation Australian Scottish descent, being brought up in the 60s. I didn't even know what pasta was. I didn't even know what pizza was. And rice is a carbohydrate, and potatoes. So I've listed here the highest carbohydrate foods, and then rice, it's pure carbohydrate. Now, all of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to glucose. And glucose is the main fuel used by every cell in the body. And I'm going to go inside the cell now and show you exactly what happens here. So the glucose goes inside the cell, and it goes through a 20-step pathway. And this 20-step pathway delivers to us 2 units of energy. Isn't that why we eat? The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into the next stage, which is an 8-step pathway. Now, this 8-step pathway is called the powerhouse of the cell. For the technical amongst us, that's the glycolytic pathway. This comes down to the mitochondria, specifically the Krebs cycle. The 8-step pathway is called the powerhouse of the cell because it delivers a whopping 36 units of energy. What makes the difference? It's oxygen. Oxygen makes the difference. This pathway produces energy by the process of fermentation, so there's no oxygen here. So that's called the anaerobic pathway. This is the aerobic pathway. So when these foods go into the body and the glucose is released into the cell under the action of insulin, insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. But there's too much. There's too much glucose on this diet. And so what the liver does, first of all, yes, it sends it down the energy cycles. And so some of the excess it stores as glycogen. And glycogen looks like a bunch of grapes almost. And that's quick-release glucose stores. And that's what I used this morning before breakfast when I was running up and down hills. I hadn't eaten since yesterday, so where did I get the energy to exercise this morning? My glycogen stores. What an amazing body we live in. And as I was moving and I needed energy, right inside the cell, it's plucked and sent down the pathway, plucked and sent down the pathway. So the second place that the liver will send the glucose is to glycogen. Quick-release glucose stores. Now, our cells can only store so much of that. And on this high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over. And so now it is stored in the body's most amazing fuel depot in the body. It's called fat. That's what fat is. You stored glucose. And what's happening with many people is they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger on this high carbohydrate diet. Now, there's an American doctor that actually brought this to the forefront. His book was #1 on the New York Times best-selling book 4 years running. Anyone got any idea who it is? It's Dr. Robert Atkins. Now, I was not interested in Dr. Robert Atkins' work because all you hear is you have got to eat a lot of meat, a lot of dairy, a lot of fat. So I was not interested in looking at his diet. But hey, he was #1 on the best-selling list 4 years running. Nutritionists, doctors hated him. Someone loved him. Who loved him? The public. Why did they love him? They're the ones buying his book. It works. It works. This is what he theorized. He theorized that if we stopped the carbohydrates, the body would start living on the fat cells. Is that right? He theorized right. He did it to himself first. And he also knew, because he knew his science, he knew that his body, his liver, could break down protein and it could break down fat back to glucose if it needed it. And so the fat cells are broken down, the protein and the fat that he's eating is being broken down, and he knew that his gastrointestinal tract would seize up if it didn't have fibre. So the Atkins diet, and most people don't realise this, was actually a high fibre diet. They had to eat 3 cups of vegetables a day and 1 cup had to be greens. That's the only way he got away with it. Now, what first brought me to this attention, and it was probably 12 years ago now, we had a businessman do our program. He said, "You're not going to like this, Barbara, but I go well on the Atkins diet." I said, "Oh." He said, "When I stop, I put all the weight back on." Now, I've got to listen. I've got to listen. And I wanted to know why. Why does he do so well on the Atkins diet? And then I had another guy do our program, and he had a lot of allergies. And on the second day, on the juicing day, he wanted to see me. I said, "What's the matter, Anton?" He said, I feel terrible." He said, "I've got a headache, my balance." He said, "It's as if my body's crying out for protein." He said, "I don't know why," but he said, "That's what I feel." Now, I've got to listen. So I made him quite a strong protein drink, gave it to him. And a few days later, he said, "Thank you." Thank you. So I'm thinking, why? Why is he doing that so well? And I wanted to know what this Atkins was. It all happened around the same time. And then God, in his wisdom and mercy, he arranged for me to stay at a friend's house the night. And when I woke up in the morning in the spare room, there's the bookcase, and I'm a reader. I love reading. And there's a book standing out. It's almost as if it was lit up. The New Dr. Atkins Revolutionary Diet. I thought, I'm going to have a look. I couldn't put that book down. His science is correct. And basically, I've just given you the science there. So what he found was he had lots of energy because the fat gets converted back to glucose. The protein and the fat he's eating go back to glucose. He had lots of energy because of that. The weight is just falling off him. And he's never hungry, because do you remember the 3 things that keep the food in the stomach longer? Fibre, protein and fat. So you see, I've got my detective hat on here. And as I read his book, I was astonished at his book. I thought it makes sense, but that amount of meat and that amount of fat. And so I started to, when people had diabetes, because this is what Atkins found, his diabetics were coming off their medication. His obese people were losing weight. And something else that surprised me and him, his people with high cholesterol levels came back to normal. And what are they eating? Meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. So I'm reading this book thinking, now what does he come at that? And then he went into the research, and he found that the high carbohydrate diet stimulates the liver to make more cholesterol. Whew. But in Dr. Malcolm Kendrick's book, The Great Cholesterol Con, he shows its damage to the arterial wall. And also Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, who wrote the book Put Your Heart in Your Mouth, she spends the first 4 chapters looking at all the environmental poisons that damage the arterial walls, causing the cholesterol to build up. It all started to make sense. But this is a meat diet, and I'm a plant-based person. How can I use his science and apply it to a plant-based diet? So I went to Genesis 1:29, where God tells Adam and Eve what to eat. So I'm going to do an assessment of this plant-based diet that God told Adam and Eve, and how does it sit with all of this? We're going to look at the food. We're going to have a look at the protein content and the carbohydrate content. And God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed." What's a herb-bearing seed? A herb-bearing seed is a grain. And with the grain, we have so much grain. Yes, we have wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, quinoa, millet, so much grain. Grains are high in protein, but they are also high in carbohydrate. So how many on this list are from grain? So we've got grain, 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 grain. The majority from the grain. Herb-bearing seed is also a legume. A legume are your beans. I just thank God that the first cookbook that I got at the age of 25, when I just became a Seventh-day Adventist, was an Indian cookbook. Indians know how to cook legumes. beautiful ways that they do their legumes. We just need to know how to make them delicious, and I certainly do. Legumes are high in protein, but they are medium to low in carbohydrate. The fact is, the legume is about 1/3 the carbohydrate that you will find in your grain. And if you have a look at a lot of the low-carb books, they attack the legumes because they've got carbohydrates, but not a lot. Not a lot. Not near as much as the grain. Another herb-bearing seed is your seed. So with your seed, that's pumpkin seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flaxseed. Seeds are high in protein and they are quite low in carbohydrate. God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, and the which of the trees a fruit-bearing seed." So what's your fruit-bearing seed? That's your nut. All your nuts come the fruit of the tree. And we have so many different nuts. We call them pecan, you call them pecan, is that right? Walnuts, macadamia nuts. I think Australia's the land of the macadamia. Delicious nut. A lady said to me, "I'm only allowed one a day on my diet." I said, "I have 10 a meal, it's not the fat." And you can see by this, it's not the fat. The most dangerous fat is that fat. That build-up of fat from this high carbohydrate diet, that's the problem. Cashew, almond, Brazil, so many nuts. Nuts are high in protein and low in carbohydrate. What Atkins found was that these are the 3 essential food groups. What he also found, and this might surprise you, is that the carbohydrate is non-essential. So let me define that. Now, I don't suggest we stop the carbohydrates. We love them, and they're nice. But the problem is when the carbohydrates are overdone and refined, and isn't that what's happening? I've even found some vegetarians are just overdoing even the unrefined. And the question before, what about fatty liver? Can you see what can create the fatty liver? Is this high carbohydrate, especially if they're refined and especially if they're all sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. There's your just overload of your fructose. So if the carbohydrates are the non-essential, and these are the essential, what should we be targeting in our food program? The essentials. Now, because that's the non-essential, this is the negotiating part of the meal. Don't negotiate your fibre. Don't negotiate your protein. Fat's important, but of course don't overdo it. But I don't know about you, but I can't drink a cup of olive oil. You see, it's a very concentrated food. It's not nice. And we should only have a little bit because it's so concentrated. But most people overdo the non-essential. And this average foods, the most popular foods, show the overload of it. So because these are the essential, fiber's essential, it needs to move through your colon. Protein's essential, it's how we build our new cells. Fat's essential, we need to be well lubricated. Some people say, "Barbara, what cream do you put on your face?" I say, nothing, absolutely nothing. But you know what, I eat probably 1, sometimes 2 teaspoons of olive oil a day. No, I can't really come at getting it off a spoon, but it's beautiful on the bread, it's beautiful on the potatoes. Ever opened a baked potato and put olive oil and Celtic salt in? Delicious. Not a lot, it's concentrated food. And the first cold pressed so that it's not destroyed. So your carbohydrates are your negotiating part of the meal. So the negotiations change depending on your size, depending on your age, depending on your height, depending on your physical, mental output through the day. How do you know you're getting the right amount? Who will tell you? Your body will tell you. I eat a very low carbohydrate food plan. I eat legumes nearly every day. Well, I do eat them every day, sometimes every meal. But I eat very low carbohydrate. Why do I do that? I just love what it does to me. I've got lots of energy, the weight just stays the same, the brain's working, I sleep well. The proofs, what do we say? The proof's in the pudding. And the Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things. Prove it. It's a challenge. Prove. And in Psalm 34, verse 8, it says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him." Just taste. Try it. Prove it. Prove it for yourself. And see. That verse, 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things, and then see what it says next. Hold fast to that which is good. And this is what we did for Bobby, remember? From 90 units of insulin a day, after 2 weeks, 10 units of insulin a day. He had a high fibre diet. He had legumes every meal. He had low carbohydrate. He had good fats, a little bit of oil on his potato, a few nuts every meal. He was never hungry because this is the food that keeps the food in the stomach longer. Is it that simple? Praise God that it is. Exercise is vital. Exercise not only strengthens every muscle in the body, exercise revives pancreases. So I had a young man named Dan come to our program. He was 19. He'd had a heavy course of antibiotics at the age of 15, which had killed off the beta cells in his pancreas. He was told his pancreas was dead. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. He was a little overweight. You know what insulin says? I must store, I must store, I must store. That's the story. We did exactly what we did with Bobby. He exercised every day. But something very interesting about Dan, he was a quiet young man. He was with us for 4 weeks. He did 2 programs and helped in the garden for 2 weeks. The first week, he told me this later, he'd get a blood sugar low in the middle of the night and he'd have a lolly, you call it a candy. Now that would get the blood sugar level up so quick and so high it would always give him a headache. But he was told that's what he had to do if he had a blood sugar level low. The second week, if he had a blood sugar level low, he'd eat an apple. It takes a while to eat an apple, especially in the middle of the night. And that glucose and fructose in the apple certainly got his blood sugar levels up. The third week, he decided on something else. If he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd do 30 push-ups. Get his blood sugar up. How'd that work? Released his glycogen stores. Must be hydrated, that's an important point. And you know what he said to me? He said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen?" I think it's the diabetic's best kept secret. Is our glycogen stores. And if they run out, guess what? We've got more in the fat stores. Especially when you're exercising. When you're exercising, I don't know if it happened to me this morning. I don't know if I used up all my glycogen stores, but if I did, the body releases the human growth hormone in the brain. And the human growth hormone in the brain causes a release of hormone-sensitive lipase, and hormone-sensitive lipase starts releasing all your fat stores. What an amazing body we live in. All we've got to do is work out how it works and work with that. Doesn't that make the most sense? So this is where the 8 laws come in. And I have recently put together my own acronym. I'll show it to you. It's called Sustain Me, and my next book is called Sustain Me. Let me show you what this all means. And do you know what sustain me means? Sustain is to strengthen physically and mentally. So, sunshine. What does the diabetic do for sunshine? They get in the sunshine and let the sunshine go on their pancreas. Anywhere that sunshine touches, it stimulates blood to the area. Use of water. This is exactly the wording that Ellen White uses when she describes the 8 laws of health. Use of water implies there's a time to use water and there's a time not. We should be drinking between meals, not with meals. And you can use water topically, as in hydrotherapy. Sleep. When you go to sleep at night, guess who else wants to sleep? Your stomach. That's why we should eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper. And with our diabetics, we're feeding them twice a day. And what are most diabetics told? You've got to eat every 2 hours. Is that right? Oh, that really disrupts digestion so that it makes it even more difficult for your blood to access the nutrients out of your food. And if you Google time-restricted eating, you'll see the reports there. The diabetics, they're conquering their diabetes with this time-restricted eating, which is eating twice a day. And that's giving you about an 18-hour fast every 24 hours. Sleep. How many hours? Not negotiable. 8 hours. 8 hours. If you don't do 8 hours, I've got some good news. And you saw in my presentation this morning, you can rewire the brain. You can train yourself back into 8 hours. Trust in divine power. Trust in God. In the book The Brain That Changes Itself by the neurologist Norman Doidge, he shows that when you picture a part of your body that's not working, if you picture it as working, it actually wakes the nerves up for that area. Picture a pancreas that starts to work, and thank God every day at every spot for a body that can heal itself. Thank Him for your pancreas that has the ability to revive, and we've seen it many times. Abstain. There are some things that must stop. What must stop if you're a diabetic? The wheat and the sugar must stop, and the dairy must stop, and the meat must stop. And go to a high fibre, generous protein, and good fats diet. There are fats that kill and fats that heal. And the killer fats are the altered fats. There's your margarines. There's your heated fats, your fried foods. And the other dangerous fat is this high amounts of fat that are dumped in the body because of a high carbohydrate diet. Caffeine. Caffeine causes an insulin response. Did you know that? So the caffeine must stop. The alcohol must stop. Inhale. And which organ do we do that through? Nose. Nose and only nose. Nutrition. We've looked at the best nutrition for the diabetic. Moderation. All things should be done in moderation. Nuts are excellent, but you can overdo the nuts. Absolutely, you can overdo the nuts. We should be having about 8 to 10 per meal. How many people don't eat any nuts for a month and then buy a packet of cashews and eat the whole lot in the afternoon? They're such a delicious food. I think it's a wonderful dessert after every meal, is to have a few nuts. And exercise. Exercise is vital for conquering diabetes. So what happened with Dan? And by the way, with exercise, You've just got to do what works for you. But you've got to work out something. With Bobby, it was swimming, it was rebounding, and it was exercise bike. With Dan, the young 19-year-old, he would just run up and down the hills at the retreat. He told me this one morning he got up. Now, our readings are different to yours. So in Australia, blood sugar level should be 5 or 6. If someone's blood sugar gets to 13, 14, 15, 16, that's too high. So he woke up, took his blood sugar, and it was 3. That's too low. By the way, why was Dan's blood sugar levels going so low in the middle of the night? He was on too much insulin. And he was going cautiously, and we certainly understand that. So he got up one morning and it was 3. He had a drink of water, got dressed, had another drink of water, and then went for a run. When he came back, he took his blood sugar levels again. They were 9. Where'd that come from? It's your glycogen stores. I will praise you, Father, for I'm fearfully, wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. By the end of 2 weeks, Dan was down to 10 units of insulin a day. Now, when he came, he was on 90 units of insulin a day. He said to me, my doctor said my pancreas is dead. I said, what's dead? Gangrene? What's dead? I said, if there's still blood going through your pancreas, there's life. Let's see what happens. And so as his blood sugar levels came down, in response to that, he lowered his insulin levels. And the person themselves are the best person to do that. He was right down to 10 units of insulin a day. Is his pancreas dead? No. No, it's not. No, it's not. Both of these, Dan and Bobby, were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and were told that they would never conquer it. They both conquered it. I've also seen children with type 1 diabetes, and in some cases it can be linked to the childhood vaccinations. So there are different things that can come together to cause the damage of the cells in the pancreas. But we live in a body that was created to revive and to heal itself. How long will it take? It can be different in every case. But both Bobby and Paul, they were just focused. I'd almost use the word relentless in their pursuit to conquer this. In fact, young Paul, he would not even have any fruit for breakfast. He said, no, I don't want any fruit. Whereas I believe that fruit's quite possible. You just, the banana's out because it has very high glycemic. The watermelon's out. But things like berries, things like grapefruit. If you don't like grapefruit, one man said, I like grapefruit with sugar sprinkled on top. Sorry, we're going to have to stop that. And until the pancreas is working well, even so-called good sugars have to be reduced until the pancreas is working well. So what did Paul have for breakfast? He would have berries. Finally, he agreed to have a little bit of fruit, and so did Bobby. Cooked millet. Millet is a lovely food. It's an alkaline grain. It needs a lot of water, maybe 3 cups of water to a cup of millet. And some people will do it in the overnight cooker. So when they wake up in the morning, it's ready. So he would have millet, some fruits, and we stew up apples. So you call it applesauce. So the apple is low glycemic, so that's a good sweetener to have on the millet. And then maybe coconut cream or some organic soy milk, and then sprinkled on top was the ground flaxseed and chia seeds. So that meal is high in fibre, generous proteins, and the fats are in the nuts and the seeds. Or they might choose to have a grapefruit and sourdough bread, excellent bread that you can get from Simple Needs, that's gluten-free. Avocado, there's some good fat, maybe a bit of olive oil on the bread, that's what I like. And then maybe red lentils on top. So that's high fibre, generous protein, great fats. And then for the main meal, always a salad, always some baked vegetables. A potato's out, not totally, just don't have 3. Have maybe 1 small one. And your sweet potato and your pumpkin, they're lower on the glycemic index than the potato. And legume, there are so many different legumes, so many different ways that you can tastefully make your legumes. There are some recipes in the back of my book, Self-Heal by Design, and they're all legumes, because that's what I find many people don't know how to cook, don't know what to do with them. And then as a dessert, a few nuts. And then that were the 2 meals. They weren't hungry, they were well satisfied. Blood sugar levels came down very fast. Some people don't like a savoury breakfast. Some people do. You've got to do what you like and what works for you. That's why I believe you're the doctor. And it's just working out what works for you and seeing what your response is. That's the easy way to do it. And what I love about my new acronym is it will sustain me. God is right. So when he said, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God and do that which is right in his sight and give ear to his commandments and keep all of his statutes, he said, I will put none of these diseases upon thee that I've put upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. In Rome, the diseases were similar. It's in a society that's become wealthy and started to refine their food. That's part of the problem. I'm going to go through some question and answers now. Sorry, questions, and I'll give the answers. Are menstrual cups safe? And maybe some of you are saying, what's a menstrual cup? It's a little rubber cup that fits around the cervix of a woman, and she uses it at period time. They're fantastic because a woman doesn't have to buy anything else. And every time she goes to the bathroom, she releases it, gives it a rinse and reapplies. Obviously, if the cup fell in the dirt or in a lump of manure, you would not apply. There's common sense, isn't there? You don't have to sterilise it. All you have to do is wash it with water and salt. That's why you don't have to hand sanitise. Just wash your hands. Just wash your hands. Is MSM okay to use? Is it acidic? It's something that we don't use, but it is, what is the mighty mineral supplement? That I don't think it's a danger. What is best for silent reflux? I was with my daughter and her partner, and I noticed he burps a lot, and I said, I think he's got silent reflux. I said, he's got to stop drinking with his meals. He's got to start giving breaks between his meals. He went to the doctor 2 months later, and she rang me up, and she said, guess what he's got? Silent reflux. Why do they call it silent? Because it's not as obvious as the usual reflux. So when someone's burping a lot, there's a few things. Hydrochloric acid is low. So you can take cayenne pepper with the meal, or the juice of a lemon with the meal, or a little bit of hot ginger tea before the meal. That can boost it. But remember, you have to apply the basic conditions that the stomach needs to function well. Does the Anna's Wild Yam cream expire? I guess it eventually would. How can muscle tension or stubborn knots in the muscles be treated? or alleviated. Does castor oil help? Something that helps a lot is stretching. You know, why are the knots there? Sometimes it's because a person... Oh dear, I'm sorry about that. I thought I'd hidden it from the microphone. You have to look at why. That's why Ellen White says ascertain the cause. Sometimes it's because a person does the same thing all the time or they stress out, but we need to stretch. Stretching is a wonderful thing. Yes, it's nice to get a massage, but we can't all afford to have a massage every day. And just swinging those arms, often arms just are not used enough. And you can self-massage it. Hot and colds in the shower helps, but magnesium oil, topical magnesium oil, helps to just relax muscles. Epsom salts baths can help. You can try castor oil. What is the difference between precancerous and cancerous cells in terms of how it should be treated? You wouldn't treat them any different. Precancerous is nearly cancerous, so you do the same thing. Would it be best to apply some form of treatment? 8 laws of health, yes. Is there a protocol? Precancerous cells, I presume that the person is referring to the cervix. And there is a herb called poke root, Pokerot. It's a uterine cleanser. And the lady can douche with the poke root, and that helps. My 90-year-old mother-in-law has a heart condition, having problems with fluid in her lungs. What can she do? Sounds quite serious when there's fluid in the lungs. I would check to see if the person's on any medication. There are diuretics that help get the fluid out of the body, and there is a natural diuretic called dandelion. Dandelion is very effective at getting fluid out of the body, but also rebounding. And remember, even a 90-year-old person can do this, just on the rebounder. And check that they're nose breathing. Mouth breathing takes dirty air into the lungs, and it can hurt the lungs, but only breathe through the nose. If you're not used to it, remember you can sleep with a little bit of tape over your mouth to encourage nose breathing. Can a UTI be healed with natural treatments? Absolutely. You check that the person's drinking enough water. One lady I know, if she gets a UTI, she just drinks 4 litres of water in a day and finds that that'll flush it out. But the herb golden seal is the king of tonics to all mucous membranes, and when you take it, it comes out in the urine and it can help to disinfect that area. Also, cranberry. Cranberries are incredibly bitter, so they have to put a huge amount of sugar into dried cranberries to make them palatable. You can buy cranberries that have been sweetened with apple juice, but probably the best for a UTI is to buy tablets, cranberry tablets. Is there a natural appetite suppressant? You see, the decision to eat or to put things in our mouth is made here. So we can strengthen the will. Remember, it's like a muscle. The more that you use it, the stronger it gets. See, what happens is we've got this great deceiver who's shooting darts at us the whole time. Remember, he accuses us before our God day and night. And so what happens is the person eats when they shouldn't, and then the great deceiver comes in, starts shooting arrows at them, and then they feel bad, then they feel guilty, and then they go and eat more, and you get in this vicious cycle, a vicious cycle. And the proverb says, a just man falls 7 times and rises up again, but the wicked fall into mischief. So remember, we have a merciful Saviour that even if we fall, he is there to pick us up and to strengthen us to do right. But remember, the will is like a muscle, and it will get stronger with use. For a person who follows a plant-based diet but is a diabetic. So I think our presentation this afternoon answered that question. We have seen it, and I've just told you 2 stories, and they are extreme stories because they were the type 1, but we have many, many stories very, very similar. How do you treat uterine fibroids? Uterine fibroids are a result of a hormonal imbalance. When the hormones are out of balance, the estrogen is high, so it's called estrogen dominant progesterone deficiency. And plastics and chemicals can all contribute to that imbalance, but the biggest contributor is the contraceptive pill. And so many women have this imbalance, and there might be a woman who has not ever been on the pill and who's done naturally, but you might ask that lady about her mother. If her mother was on the pill, then that lady can be born, the child can be born with a hormonal imbalance. But my lecture on YouTube on hormones explains how you can balance the hormones with the Anna's wild yam cream. It's an Australian cream, but there are a few people in the US that sell it. I know Living Springs Retreat, they sell it. So that's one thing, you've got to get that estrogen down because that's what's feeding the fibroids. And a castor oil compress on the abdominal area, 5 hours a day. It might take a few months, but we have seen fibroids break down that way. 60-year-old female with cystitis, so frequent urinary tract infections, we just touched on that one. Is there a natural way to treat bipolar? I have met 5 people in my travels who've been diagnosed with bipolar, schizophrenia, and they're medication-free. Praise God. I never thought this possible working as a psychiatric nurse. So how do they become medication-free and manage it? In my last lecture, I talked about the laws. I talked about the physical law, the moral law, and particularly we targeted the mental laws. Adhering to those laws will actually not only bring physical but also mental health. What I find is people with bipolar are usually heavily medicated, and that medication takes away all their creativity, all their love, and it's very difficult for them to make decisions. So for a person who is on heavy medication for bipolar, they almost have to have someone that comes in and helps them to be able to keep to those laws of health. And then little by little they can ease off the medication. So it's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of work. And the people that I've met, it took a lot of work, a lot of hard work to be able to get off the medication and to manage it. But it is manageable. But it's definitely don't stop all the medication immediately, then you're in trouble. You've got to implement the lifestyle changes, and then little by little they can try getting off the meds. Is it okay to consume miso? Absolutely. The Chinese and the Japanese have been eating it for centuries. It's a great food and it's very high in lactobacillus acidophilus. It helps to repopulate the flora in your gut, gives a lovely flavour to the soups and stews. I always put it in just at the end. Is it okay to consume soy sauce? I don't consume soy sauce. I would rather get my flavour in my food from good quality salts, good quality oils and fresh herbs. That really brings food alive. So personally, I actually never use soy sauce. I have watched documentaries on excitotoxins that claim that the soy sauce does have excitotoxins in it, but probably a healthier version would be liquid aminos, and also tamari, they're lighter ones, but personally I don't use them. What can I do for ringing in the ears? I've had this for years. Ringing in the ears usually comes from being exposed to very loud noises. So most people that have the ringing in the ears or tinnitus, it's from, can be listening to loud rock music when they were younger. All rock stars have it. All your rock singers have it because of the noise, that loud noise damages the fine mechanisms in the ear. Also, people that work with construction, jackhammers, people that have been in war with the loud noises there, it's damaging. Now, they're damaged now, those ears are damaged. But you can manage it. And I've mentioned the 5 allergen foods. There's your peanuts, your dairy, your wheat and your oats and your refined sugar. they commonly cause a build-up of mucus in the eustachian tubes, and so that compounds the problem. So if you can keep the eustachian tubes clear with foods that are really cleaner burning fuels, and breathe only ever through your nose, because nose purifies, humidifies, warms and pressurises the air, you can manage the tinnitus. Now in Australia, we have cicadas. Do you have cicadas? There's this loud buzz. And we get people come and visit and they say, how can you bear that noise? I don't even hear it. I don't even hear it because it's always there. And when they say that to me, then I hear it. It's like living by a train line. You know, people that live by train lines, after a while they can't hear the train. Have you noticed? And they should point it out. It's the same with tinnitus. You can actually train yourself not to hear it. It's like the trains or the cicadas. It's there, but you actually don't have to listen to it. So I have found that that's a couple of ways that I've seen people manage the situation. I've had soft stool lately after I had my tooth extracted because of excessive anaesthesia. Had to be injected twice. Well, you can't change what happens, but what you do is you respond to your body's symptoms. So if the stools are soft, then I would take the Slippery-On, and that will help to firm it up. Your liver is designed to detoxify you, and when you give it the right conditions, basically the conditions we're looking at, little by little it can detoxify you. Palms of my hands and feet feel like 1,000 ants lately. Can you tell me why? Very difficult for me to know why when I don't know the history. But it's possibly due to low circulation. A lot of people today spend a lot of time sitting at the computer. If your job is with computers, my suggestion is get a rebounder, and once an hour for 1 minute, jump on the rebounder. That doesn't take long. Haven't got a rebounder and you're not going to, and it's hard to get one. Well, you've got stairs, run up and down the stairs. Haven't got stairs, push-ups, do 30 push-ups every hour for 1 minute. Then that does wonders for the circulation. Cayenne pepper, will it keep or will it deteriorate? And will it cause more blood leakage? No, it will never cause blood leakage. What cayenne does, even if it's out of date, it will still seal bleeding blood vessels. That's the good news. What do I think of an elimination diet? I think an elimination diet can be very helpful when a person's trying to work out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. What do you think of food sensitivity testing? I don't think there's really a need, because I think we can work it out for ourselves. If you eat a meal and it sits very well with you, write down what you just ate and write 10 out of 10. Wow, that was good. And then if you eat another meal, it doesn't sit very well, maybe it's 5 out of 10, have a look at what was in that meal. And you can usually work it out, what works and what doesn't work. How do you... UTI, we've looked at UTI. Irregular heartbeat. 2 very common causes of irregular heartbeat are caffeine and also wheat. Because wheat has these changes in the molecular structure, when they come into the body, there's often a reaction. And so stopping those foods can often help. My friend wants to know how you got into the US without a vaccine passport. Oh, well, God did it. I can't understand that at every point, and I had something like 3 checkpoints in Australia, and I had 1 checkpoint here, I was never asked. And if I was asked, I had a vaccine exemption by my friend who's an Irish doctor. She'd written me exemption, but I never had to use it. So praise be to God. Is there a natural remedy for sleep apnea? There is. It's called keep the eustachian tubes clear by eliminating the 5 allergens. I'm just warning you, it can take at least 2 months before you see a response. And tape the mouth up at night. If a person has been mouth breathing, what happens is the little tunnels at the back of the nose, they close up. But if you start taping your mouth up at night, forcing your body to nose breathe, the little tunnels at the back of your nose, they get bigger and bigger and start opening. Isn't that good news? Hot flushes. Taking the anise wild yam cream will balance the hormones and that will reduce the flushes. I've seen many ladies after a month even on the anise yam cream, the flushes are greatly reduced. But ideally, a person should be on it for at least a year to fully balance the hormones. How would you use castor oil for a tumour or one inside the rectum? Well, I guess now this is a very interesting way to do it. So you can freeze castor oil. You can soften cotton wool with castor oil and make it the size of your little finger. It can take a few days to freeze, but when it's frozen, then it can be inserted at night. So that's straight onto the tumour if the tumour is in the rectum. So that's the best way to apply the castor oil to a tumour in the rectum. I take statins for high cholesterol. If I stop, what's the best way to lower my cholesterol levels? It was probably about 6 years ago when I was running a program in Alabama in the retreat there. There was a nutritionist there. She said, I'm 69. She was very fit and healthy. She's still working as a nutritionist. She said, I work with a doctor half the time and I have my own practice half the time. She said, I was in university 40 years ago, so I have the advantage of being trained in university 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, a cholesterol level of 300 was perfectly normal. Did you hear that? Have we changed? So they've dropped the levels. And what are we told now? If you've got a cholesterol over 200, you're in danger. It's not true. It's not true. It's worth getting Dr. Malcolm Kendrick's book, The Great Cholesterol Con. He said, I'm still waiting for the proof that fat causes heart disease. Now, there is a type of fat that could contribute to heart disease, and that's your altered fats. They become toxic fats, and they can contribute to the damage in the arterial wall. You see, God made the liver to make cholesterol. And the cholesterol's like our Band-Aid. When the arterial walls get damaged, the cholesterol is sent to help seal the damage there. But if there's a lot of damage, there's a lot of cholesterol sent. To blame cholesterol for heart disease is like blaming the fire trucks for the fire. Well, they must cause the fire. They're always there. Have you noticed? So if you have a cholesterol level of 300, 40 years ago, no one picked up a fuss. So they've lowered the levels. Has that reduced heart disease? No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, the Framingham Heart Study, that was set up to prove that cholesterol causes heart disease, but it never did. And I like this study because it's an independent study, and it's been done over probably nearly 40 years now, 40,000 people. But do you know what the study did show? And by the way, it didn't prove that cholesterol caused heart disease. But what it did show is that people with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's. Do you need a moment's silence to digest that? People with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's because the brain is the fattiest organ in the body. So when this person says, if I stop the statins, how can I lower my cholesterol? Maybe you don't need to. We had a lady do our program who had a stroke. She was only 45. They did an angiogram on her and she had no build-up of cholesterol in her arteries at all. She was under high stress, not drinking enough water. She had a heart attack. So investigate. Isn't that what God wants us to do? He wants us to investigate and find out why these things are so. How to help people who are addicted to, I think it's drugs. The best way to help people who are addicted to drugs is to implement the laws and get them off the stimulants. Because I had one lady coming off drugs, and she'd gone to a drug rehabilitation centre, and they're having 15 cups of coffee a day and smoking lots of cigarettes. So they've gone from one drug to another drug. And one lady, she said, I have 12 cups of tea a day with 4 cups of sugar in each tea. There's no limit on that. Why isn't there any limit on that? Because guess who else is having the tea and the coffee and the sugar? The nurses. But what we do at our retreat, we have steam saunas every night. And the steam saunas, you have a big sweat up and you're perspiring out the waste. And we find that it's an excellent way to detox. Also, we had one man coming off marijuana, he's coming off methadone, he's coming off cigarettes, alcohol, caffeine, all of this. And what he would do, he would just walk through the hills every afternoon. And it was summer and he would get so hot, sweaty, and then he'd dive in the mountain stream and just keep walking, keep walking, keep walking, keep walking. I thought it was a great idea. Keep busy. Physical activity, hard work, hard physical work is very good to keep the body busy while the person's detoxing from the drugs. Our time is up, so I want to thank everyone for your attention. Yes? I'm not doing any clinics in this country. My husband has booked me out pretty tightly. But I'm very happy to make the information available. So let us close our eyes and bow our head for prayer. Father, thank you so much for your goodness and mercy. Thank you for these simple natural remedies, these simple principles, that it's exactly what you promised would happen. That if we give ear and if we do, then you will put none of these diseases upon us that you have put upon the Egyptians. For you are the Lord that healeth thee. We know you're a God of mercy, Father, and we know that you wink at our ignorance, and we know that you are there to help us change our lives, to help us change our habits, to help us change these patterns. For, Father, you are looking for an army of workers, because we really do want to hasten your soon coming. And we pray these things this afternoon in the name of Jesus. Amen.
I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for coming. Some of you I know have traveled very far, and I just hope you have a safe trip home and that you will take what you've learned and put it into practice. And as we live from day to day, that we will be preparing for Jesus' soon coming. Remember to be a medical missionary, because that's what we're called to do. So good night, everyone.